Hey there. I used to read these books, Tales from the Midnight Hour, as a kid with my sister. And since her birthday's coming up and I found copies of them at the bookstore, I thought I might read them here because I can't seem to find any normal audio versions of them. So, I just figured I'd make my own and I'd share them with everybody else. So if you like them, give them a listen. And if you can't stand my southern voice, don't worry about it. Um, I don't have fancy recording equipment or anything, so this is just kind of a for fun thing. So go easy on me and enjoy some of these stories here. They're silly and spooky and fun. And happy birthday to my sister. The Furry Collar. Susan was my best friend, but I try never to think about her. It's only on certain nights, when I'm all alone in my room, that I remember. It was during Christmas vacation last year when Susan asked me to stay at her house overnight. She lived in a big, gloomy house set way back from the road, and she didn't want to be alone there at night. Her parents had gone to visit some friends and wouldn't be back until the next afternoon. Susan said we could have a really good time without her parents around. And we did. At about 12, we decided to get dressed for bed. Susan had gotten this velvet nightrobe for Christmas that had a thick furry collar. It was blood red velvet, and she looked like someone from a Dracula movie in it. We had been watching television in the living room, but then we turned it off. We hadn't noticed it before, but now the downstairs seemed too big, almost sinister. We started to go upstairs. Then all of a sudden we both ran up the steps to Susan's room as if something were coming up from behind us. After we closed the door, we laughed at ourselves, but neither one of us wanted to leave the room again. We sat down and started to talk. That's when we first heard a noise. It sounded like somebody sharpening a knife on an old emery stone. We stopped talking and looked at each other, feeling really scared inside. There was just a thick silence in the room. Suddenly, Susan started to laugh. She said she'd heard a sound like that in the house before. She said it was probably the shutters or something. That made me feel better, and we started to talk again. Then we heard it again. The sound made my teeth vibrate, as if somebody's fingernails were scratching on a chalkboard. But this sound was much worse. It shrieked up at us from the dark. Susan got a wild look in her eyes as though something horrible had come into her head. Before I could catch her, she ran out of the room, slamming the door shut and flicking off the light switch. I heard her footsteps as she ran down the first flight of stairs and then stopped. I sat in the dark, sick with fright. I called out Susan's name, but my voice was answered only by hushed silence. I didn't want to stay in that dark room alone, but even more, I didn't want to go out into that other darkness. I heard it again, that disgusting sound. Then I heard Susan's footsteps moving down the next and final flight of stairs. She went more slowly, as if she really didn't want to. I heard her reach the bottom. I waited in the room wondering what Susan was doing. I told myself she must be all right. You see, the noise had stopped right after I heard her reach the bottom of the stairs. It didn't come after that. Maybe Susan had just fixed the shutter. Maybe she had known for sure about that all the time. She just acted strangely to scare me. Maybe she was sitting on the steps right now laughing at me. I got up and started toward the door to turn the light on, but a feeling of fear swept over me that held me back like a hand against my throat. I decided I would wait where I was for Susan to return. I would wait there until her parents returned if necessary. Nothing could make me leave my darkness for that darker unknown outside the room. Time passed. My ears strained for a sound and my nerves tingled at imagined shadows. Then I heard a slow, shuffling noise on the bottom step. Was it Susan? It had to be. Yet the footsteps seemed too heavy, too deliberate. My heart began to pound, and for a moment I thought I'd lost control of my mind. It flew to the most horrible corners of my imagination, and I shook with terror. Then suddenly, I knew what I would do. Susan's new nightrobe with the furry collar. I'd wait for the door to open, and then I would reach out and touch the person's neck. If I felt the furry collar, I would know that it was Susan, and I could get her back for scaring me like this. If I didn't feel the furry collar, well, then there was nothing I could do. The shuffling footsteps had reached the second flight of stairs. I forced my own feet to take the steps to get near the door of the room. I felt the skin crawl on my back as the footsteps reached the top step and moved down the hallway. I braced myself, the door creaking slightly open as it swung. I reached my arms out and hoped. My fingers closed around the thick fur of Susan's collar. My body drained with relief. I moved my hands up to touch Susan's face. I was so happy. I no longer wanted to scare her. But as my fingers moved up from the furry collar, there was nothing. Only the bloody stump where Susan's head had been. The 10 Claws. Long ago, a small village was plagued by a monster. The monster had never been seen nor heard. It never left tracks or evidence. The only proof of its existence was its victims. The victims were always killed in the same way. 10 jagged holes would be found in their necks. At first, the monster only attacked small animals. A farmer woke one morning to find that 3 of his sheep had bled to death. Then 3 pet dogs in the village were found with the same strange claw marks in their necks. Rumors circulated in the village. Everyone heard about the animals, but no one could give a logical explanation for what had killed them. Next, a young calf was found dead. It had bled to death too, its jugular vein punctured by the 10 mysterious holes. After this, men began to arm themselves. Shotguns were kept beside beds at night. Animals were locked in the barns. Throughout the village, a rash of hysteria broke loose. People put forth all kinds of wild speculation. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. Then it happened, what everyone had really feared. The monster attacked a human, Elmer Riley, the town drunk. Elmer was found dead one morning, with the 10 claw holes in his neck. He had died just like the sheep and the dogs and the calf. He had bled to death. Not many people in the town really cared that Elmer was dead, but it scared them to know that the monster had an appetite for humans as well, and anyone could be its prey. The men in the village banded together to form a vigilante group. They didn't know what they were fighting, which made things even worse. Robert and John Harmon, 2 brothers, were appointed head of the vigilante committee. They lived on the outskirts of the village, near the forest where most people thought the monster lived. The 2 brothers knew how the monster had attacked. It had been their calf that was killed. After the first meeting of the vigilante committee, Robert and John Harmon went home to discuss their plans. They sat around the oak table in the kitchen with their father. Their old grandmother sat by the fireplace on a low chair, her black shawl wrapped around her. "We must begin the watch tonight," Robert said in a low voice. "The other men are afraid to act now, but I think tonight is the time to be on guard." "You're right," his brother agreed. "The thing, whatever it is, strikes every 5 days. It was 5 nights ago that Elmer Riley was killed." "You boys sound brave," their father interrupted, "but remember what you're dealing with. The thing seems to attack with no warning. In the killing so far, there were no signs of a struggle. How will you know what to watch for?" The father paused and looked over to his old mother sitting by the fireplace. "They should be careful, shouldn't they, Granny?" The old woman looked up at her son. She shuddered for a moment and then fell silent again. The 3 men went back to their conversation. They hadn't really expected to get an answer from her. Her mind had been foggy for years. Robert began to outline his plan to his father. John and I will take our guns to the outskirts of the forest tonight. We'll set ourselves up on the path between the forest and the village. If the monster comes out tonight, it'll have to pass by either of us." "And what protection will you have?" the father asked worriedly. "Each other," Robert answered. "We'll stay within shouting distance of each other, and we'll keep our backs to the village so that we face the forest and the monster." "Someone has to do it," John said to his father. "We don't know who the next victim will be. We can't just sit back and let the monster kill us off one by one." Their father stood up from the table and walked around the room once. Then he shook each of their hands. "Come back to me alive," he said, his voice choking. The two sons picked up their rifles from the floor. Robert pulled up a long, sharp machete off the wall. As they left the room, both of them walked over to their old grandmother and kissed her goodbye. Outside, the night was nearly pitch black. A thin sliver of a moon hung low in the western sky. They walked east, toward the forest. As they drew near to where they had planned to station themselves, John whispered, "I wonder what it looks like." "I've been thinking," Robert said. "It could be a bird. Giant bird that swoops down on you and digs its claws into your neck." They both looked up into the night sky. Clouds had shrouded the thin moon. It would be hard to see a dark shadow descending through the sky. "I thought it might tunnel under the ground like a huge weasel," John said softly. "Then it comes out and attacks you from behind." Both brothers felt the skin crawl on the backs of their necks. Slowly they both turned and looked behind them. For several minutes they stood together like that, in the dark, paralyzed by their own horrible thoughts. "We must take our places," Robert said finally. "But remember, stay within shouting distance." The two brothers moved off in opposite directions. They had agreed that each would take 20 long paces and then stop. Standing in the dark, Robert carefully cocked his gun. Then he took the machete and stuck it in the soft ground by his feet. He waited. 40 paces away, John fumbled nervously with his gun. He felt his hand shaking. Could he use his gun if he had to? He wished he could see Robert, but his brother was obscured by the dark shadows of bushes and trees. John turned around to look toward the village. He wished he were safe inside the house. Then he heard the crackling of a twig in back of him. He spun around to face the forest, but he saw nothing and heard no more. John relaxed. He set the butt of his gun down on the ground and leaned against it. He started to feel drowsy. Then he felt 10 claws digging into his neck. A terrified scream echoed through the forest to Robert. He grabbed his gun and machete and followed the awful screams to his brother. He drew near, but couldn't see anything in the dark night. Then he heard John's voice, choking and desperate. "Quit! Swing that machete behind where you hear my voice! Hurry!" Robert threw down his gun and grasped the machete in both hands. He swung it above his head and let it fall. It made a hacking sound before it hit the ground. John had been groaning the whole time, but now he stopped. For an instant, Robert thought he had killed his brother, but then John started to babble incoherently. Robert thought he heard something moving back away from them. It sounded like a giant rat scuttling over the dead leaves, but he could not see it. He fell down on the ground by his brother's body. Moaning again, John took his brother's hand and put it to his own neck. Robert shrunk back at what he felt. It was a hand, a withered hand with sharp, pointed claws. He had hacked it off the monster with his machete, and it was still stuck in John's neck. Robert jerked the foul claws from his brother's neck. Then he bound the 10 bloody holes with his handkerchief. He carried his brother back to the village, leaving the withered hand lying on the forest floor. Their father met them at the door, weeping with fear. He had heard John's terrified screams in the forest. Now he wept with happiness to see that both his sons were alive yet. They laid John out on the couch and washed out the claw marks on his neck. They could see that a few seconds more and the claws would have killed him. As he bandaged his brother's neck, Robert thought about the monster. He hoped it was in the forest now, dying a slow death. All this time, no one had noticed that the old woman was gone from her spot by the fireplace. And no one noticed when she came in through the back door and sat down over there again. From her low seat, she looked over to Robert and John. No one heard the hiss that came from her wrinkled mouth, and no one saw the bloody stump that she hid under her black shawl.